Superstar Bill Dundee. The name might not ring a bell like Hulk Hogan or The Rock, but trust me, this guy was a legend. Memphis wrestling at that time was a world all its own. It was wild, it was unpredictable, and it was absolutely unforgettable. And in the heart of that mayhem, you'd find superstar Bill Dundee. Bill Dundee was originally from Australia, but he made his way to the United States to chase his wrestling dreams back in the 1960s. He quickly became a fan favorite with his high-flying moves and his never-say-die attitude. But it was in Memphis, Tennessee, where Dundee really became a legend. This guy was a force of nature. He was a brawler, a showman, a wrestler who could make you believe that anything could happen. He'd fly off the top rope, brawl into the crowd, and talk trash with the best of them. And the fans? They ate it up. In Memphis, Dundee teamed up with another wrestling legend, Jerry the King Lawler. They were an amazing duo, and their matches were always exciting. Sometimes they were friends, sometimes they were rivals, but they always put on a great show for the fans. Dundee was known for his crazy energy and his willingness to do just about anything to win. Now, Bill Dundee wasn't afraid to get a little rough, and sometimes things got out of hand. One time back in 1979, he and Lawler were in a tag team match that turned into a massive brawl. They fought all over the arena, even into the concession stand. Fans were dodging punches and popcorn. It was wild. That brawl became a legendary moment in Memphis wrestling, and it showed just how far Dundee was willing to go to entertain the fans. Dundee also had a famous run-in with Macho Man Randy Savage. These two were both big personalities, and they clashed over who had the right to call themselves Macho Man. Things got heated, and there are stories that Dundee even pulled a gun on Savage. Savage, being the tough guy he was, disarmed Dundee and fought back. This whole thing shows just how intense things could get in the wrestling world back then. Dundee was a tough wrestler, that's for sure. He wasn't afraid to give or take a hard hit, and sometimes his opponents ended up getting hurt. He also had a strong personality, and that sometimes led to disagreements with other wrestlers behind the scenes. Outside of the ring, Dundee had his share of challenges. He had a son, Jamie Dundee, who also became a wrestler. But their relationship was complicated, and they had their fair share of disagreements. Jamie had some personal struggles, and that put a strain on their father-son bond. Dundee also faced some legal issues and health problems over the years, which added to the challenges he faced in his life. But despite all the ups and downs, Bill Dundee will always be remembered as a true wrestling legend. He was a master of his craft, a showman who knew how to get the crowd going wild. He gave us some unforgettable moments in the ring, and he helped make Memphis wrestling one of the most exciting places in the world. His legacy is huge, his career was epic, and today we're all here for it. To understand Bill Dundee, we've got to go back to the very beginning. He wasn't always superstar. In fact, he wasn't even Bill Dundee. He was born William Crookshanks on October 24th, 1943 in Dundee, Scotland, a place that would inspire his eventual wrestling name. Growing up in post-World War II, Scotland wasn't easy. Times were tough, and like many working-class families, the Crookshanks faced their share of struggles. Young William was a scrappy kid with big dreams, but wrestling wasn't one of them, at least not yet. When William was 13, his family made a bold move. They left Scotland behind and headed to Australia, searching for a fresh start. Can you imagine that? Being a teenager, leaving everything you know, and starting over halfway across the world? It wasn't easy, but that move would change William's life in ways no one could have predicted. As a teenager in Australia, William had his sights set on entertainment, but not in the wrestling ring. He loved performing, whether it was acting, singing, or just entertaining a crowd. That flair for the dramatic, it was there from the start, but life had a funny way of steering him in a different direction. By the mid-1960s, he stumbled into professional wrestling. Now, let's be real. Bill Dundee wasn't your typical wrestler. Standing at just 5 feet 7 inches tall, he didn't have the towering presence that most wrestlers of the time were known for. But what he lacked in size, he made up for in charisma and determination. He trained hard, learned the ropes, literally, and began wrestling under the name Jimmy Dundee, a nod to his Scottish roots. In those early days, Dundee cut his teeth in the Australian wrestling scene. He learned the basics, honed his craft, and started building a reputation as someone who could entertain a crowd like nobody else. But there was one problem. Australia wasn't exactly the global hub of professional wrestling. Dundee knew that if he wanted to make it big, he'd have to go where wrestling was booming, and that meant heading to the United States. In 1974, Bill Dundee arrived in Memphis, Tennessee. And let me tell you, Memphis was the place for wrestling back then. This was the territory of the Continental Wrestling Association, run by promoter Jerry Jarrett. It didn't take long for Dundee to make a name for himself. Fans loved his energy, his quick moves, and his ability to talk. Oh man, could he talk. Dundee wasn't just a wrestler, he was a showman, and Memphis loved him for it. Now you can't talk about Bill Dundee without mentioning Jerry the King Lawler. These two were like oil and water, and their rivalry was legendary. Their matches weren't just physical, though they definitely beat the heck out of each other. They were emotional. The promos leading up to their fights? Absolute fire. Fans couldn't get enough. One of their most famous matches was a hair versus hair match, where the loser had to shave their head. The stakes were personal, and the fans were completely invested. Dundee didn't just feud with Lawler, though. He was a true competitor and held his own against some of the best. Over the years, he won multiple championships, including the Southern Heavyweight title and Tag Team Gold. His partnership with beautiful Bobby Eaton as part of the Midnight Express was another highlight. Together, they were a force to be reckoned with. Dundee showed that he could shine in singles matches and tag team action alike. Part of what made Bill Dundee so special was his personality. He had this swagger about him, this confidence that made you believe every word he said, and his look, absolutely unforgettable. Flashy robes, bright colors, sunglasses, you name it, he rocked it. Dundee had a knack for standing out, whether he was playing the good guy or the villain. Either way, fans couldn't take their eyes off him. But as they say, all good things must come to an end. By the late 1980s, the wrestling landscape was changing. The rise of national promotions like WWF and WCW meant that smaller territories like Memphis started to fade. For wrestlers like Dundee, who had built their careers in the territories, this was a tough time. The spotlight wasn't as bright, and opportunities were harder to come by. Dundee didn't give up, though. He kept wrestling for smaller promotions, sometimes taking on roles behind the scenes as a booker or promoter. He even had brief stints with bigger companies like WCW, but the magic of the Memphis days was hard to recapture. Still, Dundee kept doing what he loved, stepping into the ring and entertaining fans. So, where is Bill Dundee now? Well, even though he's in his 80s, he hasn't completely stepped away from the wrestling world. You'll still see him at fan conventions, signing autographs, sharing stories, and connecting with fans who remember him from the glory days. Every now and then, he even makes special appearances at wrestling events. He may not be throwing punches like he used to, but his passion for wrestling hasn't faded one bit. Bill Dundee is more than just a wrestler. He's a storyteller, a showman, and a reminder of what made wrestling so special during its territorial heyday. For fans who grew up watching him, he's a legend. And for those just discovering his story, he's proof that you don't have to be the biggest guy in the ring to have the biggest impact. From a scrappy kid in Dundee, Scotland, to a wrestling superstar in Memphis, Bill Dundee's journey is nothing short of inspiring. He proved that determination, charisma, and love for the craft can take you far. And while he may not have reached the same heights as some of wrestling's biggest names, his legacy is secure. He's the superstar, and for fans, he always will be. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this look at Bill Dundee's incredible career, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more stories about wrestling's greatest legends. What's your favorite Bill Dundee memory? Let us know in the comments below. And hey, if there's another wrestler you'd like us to cover, drop their name in the comments too. See you in the next video.